Before it was even established, the city of Babylon was reduced to ruins and turned into a legend. How is that even possible? Let's attempt to reconcile this contradiction by racing through a millennium of history. The greatest rulers of Babylon, Hammurabi and Nebuchadnezzar II, will be discussed, along with the construction of the Tower of Babel and the true nature of Semiramis' hanging gardens. We will fly over the Ishtar Gate and make a difference in the lives of common Babylonians who lived under laws that Europe would not match for another 3.5 millennia. Finding Babylon's beginnings is like looking into the mist. We don't know when or who established the fabled city. Babylon was first mentioned in writing in the 23rd century BC. During the reign of the grandson of Sargon of Akkad, the city was known at the time as Karding, which translates to Gate of God in Sumerian. The Akkadian language gave rise to the more well-known name. The city was known to the locals as Pabaelu, which means Gate of God. Sumerian was gradually replaced by Akkadian, and the name stuck. From there, it entered ancient Greek and acquired the Babylonian sound that is still recognized today. Around 2000 BC, the Sumerian Akkadian kingdom fell, marking the beginning of Babylonian history. Nomadic Amorite tribes took control of Babylon. The first Babylonian dynasty was established about a century later by Sumer-Abum, an Amorite chieftain. This dynasty's reign is referred to by historians as the Old Babylonian period, when Sumer-Abum took control of Babylon. He constructed new temples, built defensive walls around the city, and dug canals to provide water. Subsequently, Sumer-Abum initiated military operations. He took control of Kosalu, a nearby city, and destroyed it. He formed an alliance with the rulers of Sippar and Kish. By the time of his death, Sumer-Abum had added the cities of Kuda and Dubat to his realm. Thus, Babylon changed from a small, unremarkable town to the capital of a future, renowned power. Let's go back to the Sumerian Akkadian kingdom and look at the circumstances surrounding Babylon prior to its ascent in ancient Mesopotamia. The Sumerian Akkadian kingdom was a powerful state. At its height, it extended northward from Mesopotamia to the Persian Gulf Coast from the late 22nd to the late 21st century BC. The kingdom lasted for a century. People were switching from copper tools and weapons to bronze during this time. As Mesopotamia was nearing the end of the early Bronze Age at the time, Babylon was a minor city in the Sumerian Akkadian kingdom. Towards the end of the 21st century BXE, the empire started to fall apart as Amorite tribes attacked non-stop, leaving nothing in their wake. Hungry uprisings broke out among the devastated residents. The Elamites revolted and demanded independence in the south. As the Sumerian Akkadian kingdom grew weaker, it eventually broke up into distinct states. Mesopotamia then turned into a battlefield for never-ending conflicts. The city-states of Iron and Lhasa served as the primary hubs of conflict. Furthermore, the kingdoms of Elam in the south, Ishnuna in the east, and Assyria and Mari in the north emerged. Although individual states could form alliances, since none of them had a clear advantage, they frequently clashed over border expansion. Everything seemed to be in disarray. All of Mesopotamia's warring states would eventually come together under the leadership of Hammurabi, the Babylonian king, to form the Babylonian kingdom after Sumer-Abum. Hammurabi was the sixth king of Babylon and a member of the first Babylonian dynasty. It's unclear exactly what his name means. Some scholars interpret it as Hammurabi, which means the ancestor is great, while others interpret it as Hammurabi, which means the ancestor is a healer. Early in the 19th century BCE, Hammurabi was born. Stonehenge was finished at about the same time in prehistoric Britain, on the opposite side of the globe, in what is now Iraq. Hammurabi inherited a kingdom that stretched from Sippar to Murad. This was not the strongest state at the time. The neighboring kingdoms of Lhasa, Ishnuna, Elam, and the realm of Shamshi-Adad posed far greater threats. By the end of his life, Hammurabi had conquered all of Mesopotamia through cooperation with some and warfare with others. Let's take it in order. Though it appears that Hammurabi did not engage in conquest was during his early reign. The young monarch first pardoned all of his subjects' debts. After taking the throne, he strengthened the city walls, dug canals, and constructed and restored temples. During the ensuing years, he didn't wage war on the cities of Isin and Uruk until the 7th year of his reign, when he simultaneously conquered them. At that time, Rimsin, the ruler of Lhasa, ruled over Isin and Uruk. However, Rimsin ceded Hammurabi 2 significant cities without retaliating with war. This could be because Hammurabi had allied himself with Shamshi-Adad, the ruler of the kingdom in Upper Mesopotamia, prior to the assault. Apparently, Rimsin made the decision to get ready and launch a war later after a year. Rimsin retook Ian and Uruk. By sending troops against Hammurabi, a long-lasting peace was established between them. After that, his boundaries would be extended in other directions by Hammurabi. Hammurabi turned down the king of Eshna's offer of an alliance during his 11th year in power. Rather, he formed an alliance with Shamshi-Adad I, who ruled over all of Upper Mesopotamia's major cities. This was the strongest ally available at the time. Only in the 30th year of his reign did Hammurabi start his decisively successful campaigns. The combined forces of Elam, Maljem, and Ishmuna were then vanquished by him. Following this victory, Hammurabi first proclaimed that all of Lower Mesopotamia was included in the boundaries of the Babylonian kingdom. With such a proclamation, Hammurabi no longer acknowledged Rimsin's authority, and war with Lhasa was unavoidable. Hammurabi led his army up to the Lhasa walls. After a month of resistance under siege, Rimsin was finally routed. It's unclear what happened to him after that. Hammurabi received the title of Father of the Amorites from the defeated monarch following the passing of Hammurabi's ally. Shamshi-Adad, the Upper Mesopotamian kingdom, fell in his later campaigns. Hammurabi defeated the independent states of Assyria and Mari. Hammurabi defeated the attack of nomadic tribes and took Ishmuna during his 38th year in power. He then gained control over all of Mesopotamia. Hammurabi was a skilled strategist and negotiator, even though he was far from his native country. He successfully waged war by carefully selecting his allies. With the aid of these abilities, he was able to turn Babylon from a little town into the capital of a renowned kingdom. However, this was just one aspect of his remarkable character. In addition, Hammurabi was among the first legislators in history. Babylon reached its heyday as a result. Hammurabi initiated judicial reforms after securing his position of authority. He oversaw the compilation of a set of laws outlining the obligations and rights of the people living in the Babylonian kingdom. An image of Hammurabi and Shamash, the god of justice, and the sun were carved into a diorite stela that held the laws Hammurabi had complete control over. He was held in the same regard as a god who creates laws and governs society. Things had been different in the past. To stay in power, rulers had to consider the views of the high priesthood. 3 estates with different rights made up Babylonian society. Most of the residents were free individuals. They were referred to as Aum, which means man. They had their own land and lived in communities for the most part. Hammurabi stayed out of their lives. He even made sure that the people's communal lands were not taken by the authorities. of Aum did, however, pay taxes. The free dependent, also known as the mashkinum, or self-prostrating individual, made up the second estate. They were typically descended from slaves in palaces or temples. Mashkinum had either no roots in any community or had willingly broken ties with one, though free people and even nomads might be among them after filing for bankruptcy. Some gave up their land. Others did so in an effort to advance in their careers. Mashkinum worked for the government and owned land on royal territory. City officials, many of whom were Mashkinum themselves, oversaw their operations. State officials and farmers with lower status could both be part of this estate at the same time. Lastly, slaves or the warden made up the third estate. They included warriors who had been captured or individuals who had been deprived of their freedom due to criminal activity or not payment of debts. A king, a temple, or a private person could own slaves. A slave's meager belongings were all regarded as belonging to their master. Legally speaking, slaves were comparable to goods that could be pledged or sold. It was regarded as nothing more than destroying or damaging someone else's property. If someone killed or maimed a slave, only the material loss was reimbursed by the guilty party. Here's the important thing. Though nobody in Babylon was born without rights, children born to a slave woman and a free man were free. The enslaved mother could not be sold. Even if the father did not recognize them, she stayed at home with her kids. The ideas of talion, equal retribution, and an eye for an eye served as the foundation for many of Hammurabi's laws. However, one's social status determined one's criminal liability. For example, if a free man injured another free man's eye, the offender's eye was destroyed. However, if a free man knocked out a mashkinum's eye, the accused was fined half the slave's worth and had to pay roughly £1 in silver for the harm done to the slave. The temple and high priests lost their power to enact laws under Hammurabi for the first time in history. Crimes were viewed as offenses against human life and the fundamentals of society, rather than as transgressions of holy laws. The king now appointed judges from among the city's residents. Priests were merely assistants, but judges who broke the law might lose their jobs. To the greatest extent feasible at the time, women's and children's rights were safeguarded by Hammurabi's laws. A woman was a complete individual and a self-sufficient family member. If her husband turned out to have premarital debts, she could divorce him after getting married. She could file a lawsuit, prove her allegations, and end the marriage if her spouse had cheated on her, accused her of adultery, or assaulted her after that. She could get married again. The husband was entitled to take a second wife if the first wife was childless or became very ill, but if his wife herself offered him a slave woman to live with, he was unable to select a concubine on his own. A sick wife could also not be abandoned by her husband. A man could not inherit his wife's dowry. If she passed away, their children received the entire inheritance. If a man had children from both a legal concubine and his wife, following his passing, each child was given an equal portion of his belongings. Freedom was given to the concubine mother and her offspring naturally. Not every Babylonian had the same rights, however. The respected role of women in the family and the shielding of kids from a father's despotism demonstrate how advanced society was at the time. The first step toward preventing the powerful from oppressing the weak was taken by Hammurabi. Thus, it is mentioned in his laws. The Babylonian kingdom lost its power in Mesopotamia following Hammurabi's demise 5 centuries later. Assyria, which had grown into a powerful nation by then, put pressure on Babylon. Babylonian kings looked to their neighbors for assistance in fending off the Assyrian threat for the next 5 centuries. Babylon and Assyria would be at a standstill. The attack of the Chaldeans weakened Babylon in the 8th century BCE. When the Babylonian rulers found themselves in a precarious situation, they turned to their adversaries, the Assyrians, for assistance. It was a disastrous choice for Babylon and Assyria to form an alliance in exchange for his assistance in defeating the Chaldeans. The Assyrian king dispatched his own governor to Babylon. As a result, Assyrian rule overtook the Babylonian state, and the Babylonians quickly saw how vulnerable their position was. Babylonian governors were always chosen from among the eldest sons of Assyrian kings. However, Sennacherib disregarded this custom. He had previously attempted direct control over Babylon. However, the city rebelled all the time. Thus, Sennacherib made the decision to alter his strategy. He installed Melibni, a young Babylonian aristocrat who had grown up in the Assyrian court, on the Babylonian throne. It was an easy calculation that was both loyal to Assyria and familiar to the Babylonians. He was referred to as a puppy raised in my palace by Sennacherib himself. However, the puppy soon showed of its teeth. Belni organized an uprising in collusion with the Babylonians. Sennacherib eliminated Melibni and put an end to the uprising. Ashur-nadin Shumi, his own son, was appointed governor this time, but he also did not hold office for very long. The prince was taken prisoner by the Elamites when they invaded Babylonia, and he was probably put to death following this. The city saw a series of uprisings. Sennacherib then went back to Babylon with the sole goal of demolishing the city. He captured his brutality. In this way, I filled the city's squares with Babylonian corpses. I distributed precious stones and gold among my people. My warriors captured and destroyed the gods who lived in the city. I set fire to the city and all of its homes, destroying them from the ground up. Ultimately, Sennacherib gave the order to flood the burned ruins. Water filled the streets after his soldiers breached the Araka River, which flowed through the city. Babylon was thus destroyed. Then something occurred that was seen by the time as a direct act of the gods. Sennacherib was assassinated by his own sons in 681 BCE. This was not a palace conspiracy to the people of Mesopotamia. It was Marduk's decision. The god, whose statue had been stolen from Babylon, had used blood to exact revenge. The restoration of Babylon started as soon as Sennacherib passed away. The best builders took part in the 20-year project on the site of demolished palaces. New ones were built with unparalleled grandeur. The ruins of Babylon, which have mostly survived to this day, were established in the 7th century BCE. Esarhaddon, the Assyrian king, oversaw the restoration of the city. Around this time, the Neo-Babylonian period began, marking the beginning of a new chapter in Babylonian history. Gradually, the remaining Babylonians made their way back to their homes. The Chaldeans, who had already settled in Mesopotamia by then, accompanied them. The Chaldeans, whose raids Babylon had previously repelled, started to mix with the locals, acquire rights, and have an impact on state affairs. Nabopolassar was one of these Chaldeans. He was a military leader in Nineveh, the Assyrian capital. Nabopolassar and his army launched an uprising as the Assyrian Empire started to deteriorate and lose control over its subject countries. He marched toward Babylon, subduing one city after another, and rejected Assyrian rule over time. Nabopolassar rose to prominence as one of Mesopotamia's most powerful kings. He took the throne and established the 10th Neo-Babylonian dynasty, also called the Chaldean dynasty, in the conquered Babylon later, in 612 BCE. His army overthrew Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. Thus, Mesopotamia came under the control of a Chaldean rebel. Nebuchadnezzar II, Nabopolassar's son, succeeded his father and carried on his father's legacy, leading Babylon into a new era of prosperity. Nebuchadnezzar II was born in ancient Greece at approximately the same time, at 630 BC. Sappho, the future poetess, and Solon, the future democratic founder, were born. They were almost all the same age. In Odeon, Nebuchadnezzar's name sounded like Nabu Kudari User, which means Nadu protect my firstborn in Odeon mythology. The god Nabu was regarded as the patron of wisdom. The empire that Nebuchadnezzar II inherited already covered all of Mesopotamia. However, he carried on his father's victories. He pushed its boundaries even farther. Egypt was the only remaining adversary, and the reason for this was that the strength of both sides was equal. The Neo-Babylonian kingdom reached its zenith under Nebuchadnezzar. Two subject cities were now paying tribute to Babylon. Instead of Nineveh, people moved to the capital from other cities. There was a lot of hired labor, and the population expanded quickly. Nebuchadnezzar made the decision to rebuild the Hammurabi-era ziggurat early in his reign. An architect by the name of Aradishu oversaw the construction of this ziggurat, which was named Etane, which means House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. After being reconstructed, Etane rose to become Mesopotamia's tallest building and subsequently served as the model for the Tower of Babel myth. It was devoted to Marduk, Babylon's highest deity. Hired laborers were mostly responsible for building palaces, canals, and city walls. Temple officials, who also managed building projects in the capital, paid for their labor. The money came from the temple's reserves, which were mostly made up of war booty, gold, silver, and royal presents. Foreigners who were captured only supplied extra labor. However, Babylon's magnificent construction did not stop there. The second of the 7 wonders of the world, the fabled Hanging Gardens, was constructed by Nebuchadnezzar for his wife. Amytis. Legend has it that Amytis was a Median princess. She yearned for her native land, the high mountains and shaded forests of Media, and felt burdened by the hot, dusty city of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar ordered the Hanging Gardens to be built so that his wife could escape the chaos and immerse herself in her memories, thereby easing her grief. The Hanging Gardens are named after the legendary Queen Semis in literature. Shamramat, an Assyrian ruler who lived 2 centuries before Nebuchadnezzar was born, served as the model for Semiramis. The Hanging Gardens of Amytis could then be considered the second wonder of the world. However, the existence of the Hanging Gardens is still a mystery. They are not mentioned in any Babylonian text from Nebuchadnezzar's time. Greek and Roman writers who wrote centuries later are the source of everything we know out of the 7 wonders of the world. This is the only one whose existence is still in doubt. Even though the Hanging Gardens are only a lovely myth, Nebuchadnezzar's construction around Babylon was unquestionably real, and perhaps even more spectacular. Nebuchadnezzar built 2 walls around the city, each of which was roughly 90 feet thick. That is, 4-lane highways with teams of 4 horses could pull chariots along the top of these walls while still having space to turn around. The Great Wall of China, in contrast, is 15 to 30 feet wide. The walls of Babylon were 3 to 6 times wider. It reminds me of Attack on Titan's walls. The city itself was about the size of downtown Chicago, spanning about 2,200 acres. Various estimates put its population at 200,000. Doesn't that sound amazing? Here is some background information. Rome was still a village in those same years, while Athens had roughly 90,000 residents. The first city in human history to surpass 200,000 people was probably Babylon. The main entrance to the city, the Ishtar Gate, was built in a way that would make anyone who approached it gasp for air. The foundation of the gate extended 46 feet below the ground, and the gate itself rose 50 feet above the ground. The building was 95 feet high, overall the height of a building with 9 stories. But the height wasn't the only thing that was astounding. Vibrant cobalt blue glazed bricks covered the entire gate's facade. It wasn't paint. The gate appeared to be carved from lapis lazuli, the most valuable blue stone of antiquity. From a distance, due to the thin layer of vitreous that shone so brightly in the sun, there was nothing like it anywhere else in the world. Figures of 575 measured dragons and bulls were arranged in 13 rows against the blue background like a mosaic. Each figure was put together from separately molded bricks. Now picture yourself on the processional route after passing through the Ishtar Gate. It was wider than Broadway in New York and extended more than 0.5 miles to a width of 65 feet. 50-foot tall rose walls with 120 life-size glazed lions on each side. Each lion was made up of 46 separate bricks and measured roughly 6.5 feet in length, and this particular detail demonstrates how thoughtful all of this construction was. While the lions on the western wall led with their right paw, the lions on the eastern wall advanced with their left. It appeared as though two columns of lions were pressing down on you from both sides if you were walking down the road toward the gate. The Neo-Babylonian kingdom's history lasted only about a century. Babylon flourished during Nebuchadnezzar II's reign, but it quickly declined after his passing. Babylon was subjugated by the Persian king Cyrus II as early as 539 BC. Persian power only increased from that point on. Babylon's last important lands, but it was still able to govern itself for a few more decades. In 481 BC, everything changed. An uprising against the Persians was started by the Babylonians. However, Xerxes, the Persian king, put an end to the rebellion and destroyed Babylon. The Persians removed the statue of Marduk as a last symbolic act after the divine guardian of Babylon left his city. The once renewed capital started its protracted decline into dusk. Now for the most crucial part. Do you recall the paradox we began with? Before it was even established, Babylon was reduced to ruins and became a legend. You now understand how that is feasible. Sennacherib destroyed and drowned the Babylon of Hammurabi, the same renowned and legendary Babylon. It has vanished. The ruins found by archaeologists in the Iraqi desert today are from a different Babylon that Nebuchadnezzar constructed on the site of the destroyed one. The stones that remain from it are not the origin of the legend. Although we remember Babylon from its first life, we are familiar with it from its second.